Jacob Sterling stood by the panoramic window of his 30th floor apartment, watching New York City bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. In his hand, he held a crystal glass of whiskey, swirling it as he watched the amber liquid spin. His reflection in the glass showed a perfectly tailored suit, a stylish haircut, and the weary eyes of a 30-year-old who had achieved everything too soon. "So what now?" he asked the empty space of his sterilely decorated home. The sound of his phone broke the silence. Jacob glanced at the screen. The Devil's Advocate, the contact name he'd assigned to his uncle, Al. He sighed deeply and answered, "Yes, Uncle Al? I saw the pictures online. Breaking up with Amanda was the best decision of your life, kid." A booming voice crackled through the speaker. "That woman spent more on handbags in 2 months than I did on my first car." "Thanks for the reminder," Jacob muttered, taking a sip of whiskey. "I was just looking at her last credit card statement. $4,000 at the Prada boutique in one day. See, I told you. They're all the same. They're only interested in the contents of your wallet, not your heart." Jacob rolled his eyes. Al Walczak, his mother's brother, was the only family member who didn't sugarcoat things. In his 50s, with 3 divorces under his belt and a fortune made in real estate, he considered himself an expert on women, though his methods were controversial, to say the least. "Uncle, did you just call to say, 'I told you so'?" "No, I have a proposition for you. Meet me for lunch tomorrow at Verve. I've got an idea that will solve your women problems once and for all." Jacob was about to refuse, but curiosity got the better of him. "Fine, 1 o'clock, he agreed, knowing he would probably regret it. The next day, precisely at 1 o'clock, Jacob walked through the doors of the exclusive downtown restaurant Verve. His uncle was already there, occupying the best table with a view of the park. Dressed in a bright red blazer, Al looked like a flamboyant bird amidst the elegant, muted decor. "Jake!" he called out, waving energetically. "Come on, I've already ordered the wine." "It's the middle of a workday, Uncle," Jacob reminded him, taking a seat. "Nonsense! You're the CEO of your own company. Who's going to stop you?" Al filled his nephew's glass. "Besides, you'll need this to listen to my brilliant plan." Jacob sighed but took a sip. The wine was excellent. It must have cost a fortune. "So, let's hear this brilliant plan." Al leaned forward conspiratorially. "Your problem is you can't tell the difference between solid gold and gold-plated trash. The women you choose are masters of camouflage. They look like princesses but have the mentality of parasites. A very poetic comparison, Uncle." "Thank you." Al puffed out his chest like a proud peacock. "But to the point. You need a test, something to expose their true intentions." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "A test?" "Exactly." Al reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out 5 identical black credit cards. He laid them on the table like a poker hand. "Voila! What is this?" 5 cards, each with a $25,000 limit, all linked to a special account I set up for you yesterday. Jacob choked on his wine. "You did what?" "Relax, it's a gift. Use them wisely." Al grinned like a Cheshire cat. "You give one to each of 5 women you're considering as a potential partner. Tell each one it's a secondary card for your account, that they can use it whenever they want, and then you watch what they do with it." Jacob stared at the cards in disbelief. "Is this some kind of joke? You want me to hand out credit cards to women like candy?" "Like a character test," Al corrected him. "The way a woman spends money says more about her values than 1,000 dates at expensive restaurants." A waiter approached the table, interrupting their conversation. Al ordered oysters and a steak, while Jacob, still stunned, chose the first thing on the menu without paying attention to what it was. "This is insane," he said after the waiter left. "Besides, I'm not dating 5 women right now." "Then find them. You're young, rich, and reasonably good-looking. For a member of our family," Al added with a crooked smile, "host a speed dating event at your company, go to some charity galas, use dating apps, whatever. Find 5 women and give them a chance to show you who they really are." Jacob wanted to refuse, but something about the crazy idea intrigued him. After a series of failed relationships with women who were mainly interested in his bank account, maybe he did need a radical method. And what if they all spend the money on frivolous things? Al shrugged. Then you'll know I was right, but maybe, just maybe, you'll find one who surprises you. And 2 days later, Jacob sat in his office on the 20th floor of the Sterling Tower, home to his tech company, Sterling Tech. The sound of a vacuum cleaner from the hallway was getting on his nerves, especially since he was trying to focus on reviewing the profiles of the candidates for his absurd experiment. Dominique Vance, an influencer with 300,000 followers on Instagram. They had met at a new club opening last week. She seemed intelligent and witty, though most of their conversation revolved around fashion brands and celebrities. Olivia Morgan, an ambitious lawyer from the firm that handled his company's legal affairs. Always perfectly dressed, with flawless makeup and a razor-sharp mind. They had flirted during their last business meeting. Caroline Adams, a model he met at a photo shoot for a business magazine. Beautiful, but a bit vapid. She had agreed to a date before he could even finish asking. Veronica Nash, a marketing director at a rival company. They met at an industry conference and exchanged numbers under the pretext of a potential collaboration. He was missing a fifth candidate. Jacob rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. This whole idea was preposterous. The sound of the vacuum cleaner suddenly stopped, followed by a knock on his door. "Come in," he called out, not looking up from his screen. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling. I didn't mean to disturb you, but may I clean your office now?" Jacob looked up and saw a young woman in a simple grey uniform from the cleaning company. She held the vacuum with one hand and brushed away a strand of brown hair that had escaped from her messy bun with the other. She had large green eyes and a light dusting of freckles across her nose. "Of course, go ahead," he replied, returning to the profiles. The girl entered quietly and began vacuuming, trying not to be intrusive. Jacob glanced at her a few times, noticing the focus on her face. She worked methodically, with an attention to detail he rarely saw in cleaning staff. "Are you new?" he asked suddenly, not quite sure why. The girl turned off the vacuum. "To the cleaning company, no, but to this building, yes. This is my second week." "What's your name?" "Julia Romero," she answered, slightly surprised. Jacob nodded, a crazy idea forming in his mind. It would be absurd, but that was the whole point of this experiment, wasn't it? "Julia, could you sit down for a moment?" he asked, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. The girl hesitated, startled. I don't know if I should. I still have 3 more offices to clean. This will only take a minute, and no, you're not in trouble," he added, seeing her worried expression. Julia set the vacuum aside and sat stiffly on the edge of the chair, folding her hands in her lap. Up close, he noticed that her uniform, though simple, was perfectly pressed, and her nails were short and clean, without any polish. "I have a proposition for you," Jacob began, hardly believing what he was about to say. "An unconventional one." Julia's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Unconventional?" "Yes." Jacob pulled one of the black credit cards from his drawer and placed it on the desk. "I'd like you to take this and use it whenever you want." Julia looked at the card, then at him, her face a mask of utter confusion. "I'm sorry?" "It's a credit card with a $25,000 limit. You can spend the money on whatever you'd like." Julia sat motionless, staring at him as if he had just announced he was an alien. "Is this some kind of joke? A hidden camera show?" she asked, looking around the office. "No, it's an experiment," Jacob answered honestly. "An experiment?" she repeated in a flat voice. "And you chose the cleaning lady?" "Exactly," he admitted, realizing how that must have sounded. Julia stood up slowly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but I'm not interested in any experiments." "It's nothing inappropriate," Jacob assured her quickly. "Just take the card and spend the money. On anything. You don't have to do anything in return. No strings attached." Julia tilted her head, looking at him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Why?" It was a good question. Why was he offering a credit card to a random cleaning lady? Honestly, Jacob sighed. It's my crazy uncle's idea. He claims the way a woman spends money says everything about her character. To his surprise, Julia let out a short laugh. And you believe that? I don't know, he admitted truthfully, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Julia was silent for a moment, considering his offer. Her gaze shifted between him and the black card on the desk. And what if I spend it all on a vacation to the Maldives? She asked finally. That's your decision, Jacob shrugged. What if I buy diamond jewelry? Go for it. And what if I donate it all to charity? Jacob smiled faintly. That would also be your decision. Julia bit her lower lip, and a spark he couldn't quite interpret appeared in her eyes. All right, she said suddenly, reaching for the card. I'll take part in your experiment. Jacob was surprised she had agreed so easily. Really? Yes, Julia said, tucking the card into the pocket of her uniform. But on one condition. What's that? You won't try to track me or check what I'm doing. You'll only get the credit card statement, like any normal account holder. Jacob smiled involuntarily. This girl had backbone. Deal. Just give me your phone number so I can contact you about the results of the experiment. Julia hesitated, but then recited her number. Jacob saved it in his phone under candidate number 5, the cleaner. Thank you for your cooperation, Julia, he said, trying to sound professional. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Sterling, she replied with a mysterious smile, returning to her vacuum. You don't know what I'm going to do with this money yet. After she left, Jacob realized it was the first time in months he had felt genuinely intrigued by a woman. Not because of her looks or her status, but because of her directness and confidence, despite the social chasm between them. This is going to be interesting, he thought, turning back to his list of the other candidates. 4 days had passed since the experiment began. Jacob sat in his office, scrolling through notifications from his banking app. Every use of one of the 5 black cards sent an instant alert to his phone, which had turned the last few days into a peculiar spectacle of consumption. Dominique Vance wasted no time. Within 48 hours of receiving the card, she had shopped at Gucci, Prada, and Louis Vuitton, totaling $7,300. The next day, she booked a package of treatments at an exclusive spa for $2,400 and paid for a VIP table reservation at a trendy club, $1,500 for a bottle of champagne. Jacob shook his head in disbelief. $10,200 in 3 days, without a single thank you or even a text message. Olivia Morgan's card had also been busy. A shopping spree at Saks Fifth Avenue, expensive wine delivered to her apartment, a reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Everything was done with class and a degree of moderation, but it was consistently luxurious. Caroline Adams surprised him only partially. Instead of buying clothes or cosmetics as he'd expected, she invested in camera equipment. A camera and lenses for $13,000, professional tools or expensive toys. It was hard to say. Veronica Nash was the most methodical. First, a trip to Sephora for $1,200, then jewelry from Tiffany's for $2,600, and finally, designer shoes for $3,400. It was as if she were testing the card incrementally, making sure it worked before she started spending in earnest. And Julia? Jacob frowned, checking the notifications again. Julia's card remained inactive. Not a single transaction, not even a trial purchase for a small amount. Nothing. That was unexpected. He picked up his phone and scrolled to the contact saved as candidate number 5, the cleaner. He hesitated for a moment before texting, "Good morning, Julia. This is Jacob Sterling. I just wanted to make sure the card is working properly. I haven't seen any transactions." The reply came after a few minutes. "Good morning, the card works. I'm just thinking about what to use it for. Not everyone spends money thoughtlessly, you know." Jacob smiled involuntarily. The jab was subtle but effective. "I never suggested you would spend it thoughtlessly. I was just curious." The three dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response arrived. Patience is a virtue, Mr. Sterling, even in social experiments. Jacob let out a laugh. This girl had more character than all the other candidates combined. Call me Jake, and you're right. This time, the reply was immediate. I think I'll stick with Mr. Sterling. For now, at least. Have a nice day. Jacob put his phone down, surprised by his own disappointment. Why did he even care what some cleaning lady did with her card? It was just an experiment, nothing more. And yet, Jacob sat at the hearthstone, waiting for Dominique. He had chosen the place specifically, a small, cozy restaurant with a view of the river, serving modern American cuisine. No ostentation or snobbery, just class and authenticity. Dominique was 25 minutes late. She swept into the restaurant like a storm, drawing the eyes of every guest. She wore a tight red dress that highlighted every inch of her toned body, and on her arm was a new Gucci handbag, the very one she had bought with his card 2 days earlier. "Jake, darling," she exclaimed, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Her perfume was intense and sweet, almost overwhelming. "Sorry I'm late. I was filming an Insta story for a new campaign and completely lost track of time." "No problem," he replied, though her cavalier attitude toward his time was irritating. Dominique looked around the restaurant with a faint grimace of disappointment. "This is where we're eating? I thought we were going to Per Se or 11 Madison Park. I wanted to try something new." Jacob lied smoothly. In reality, he was curious to see her reaction to a less pretentious place. "Oh, how charming!" Dominique clapped her hands with forced enthusiasm. "I love these authentic spots." The waiter came to take their order. Jacob chose the clam chowder and the duck with cherries, while Dominique, after much hesitation, settled on a goat cheese salad, asking about the calorie count and if the dressing could be served on the side. "So," Jacob began after the waiter left, "how are you enjoying the card? I see you've already put it to good use." Dominique's face lit up. "It's amazing. I can't thank you enough. This handbag," she gestured to the Gucci on the chair beside her, "is something I've been dreaming of for months. And the Louboutins I bought yesterday," she sighed dreamily. "You're wonderful, you know that?" Her gratitude would have been more convincing if she had bothered to call and thank him when she actually made the purchases. "I'm glad you like it," he said neutrally. "What are you planning to buy next?" "Oh, so many possibilities!" Dominique became even more animated. "There's this fantastic watch at Tiffany's that would match a bracelet I've had forever. And I was thinking about a weekend spa trip to the Hamptons. We'd go together, of course," she added quickly, as if it were a selling point. Jacob nodded, listening, as Dominique spent the next 15 minutes describing all the things she planned to buy with his money. Not once did she ask about his day, his work, or how he was feeling. When their food arrived, Dominique took at least 8 photos of her salad from various angles before even tasting it. "I have to post this on Insta," she muttered, tapping on her phone. "My followers love culinary discoveries." Jacob watched her as he ate his chowder. She was objectively beautiful, with perfect features and a stunning figure, but her every move, every word, seemed carefully calculated for an audience, even when that audience was just him. "You know what I value most in life?" he asked suddenly, interrupting her monologue about the latest social media trends. Dominique blinked, clearly thrown off by the change of subject. "What's that, darling?" "Authenticity." "Oh, absolutely," she agreed fervently. "Authenticity is key. I'm always telling my followers to just be themselves. It's why I have such an engaged community." "And you, are you authentic?" Dominique laughed nervously. "Of course, what a question." Even now, her smile faded slightly. "What do you mean?" "Nothing in particular," Jacob shrugged, returning to his dish. "I'm just wondering if the restaurant isn't good enough for photos, or if the salad isn't photogenic enough." "Jake, what has gotten into you?" Dominique put down her phone, clearly offended. "Of course, everything is wonderful. I'm just sharing my life with my followers. It's my job. And when you're not working, when you're just you, The question hung between them like a heavy curtain. Dominique opened her mouth to answer but closed it without a word. For a split second, Jacob saw something real in her eyes. Confusion, maybe even fear. But the moment passed, and her face returned to its perfect mask. "I'm always me, Jake," she finally replied, her voice soft but her eyes cold. Just the version of me that knows what she wants from life. 2 nights later, Jacob sat on a leather sofa in Olivia's minimalist apartment. Their meeting was more sophisticated. A dinner prepared by her personal chef, wine that cost $400 a bottle, purchased with his card, and subtle jazz music playing in the background. Olivia Morgan was the opposite of Dominique. Reserved, elegant with the sharp intellect of a lawyer and a cool, calculated grace. Her dark hair was styled in a perfect chignon, and a simple black jumpsuit accentuated her slim figure. "That chef's table you organized last week was phenomenal," she said, pouring him more wine. "I haven't had lamb that perfect in a long time." Jacob nodded. The chef's table for 12 people at a 2-Michelin-star restaurant had been his idea for a networking event with potential investors. He had invited Olivia as his date, though they were still just getting to know each other. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." "Speaking of good taste," Olivia ran a finger along the rim of her glass, "I noticed the card you gave me works flawlessly." Jacob smiled slightly. "Yes, I saw. I hope you don't mind my investments?" There was something predatory in her voice, like a cat playing with a mouse. "Not at all. It's a gift. You can do what you want with it." Olivia tilted her head, studying his face. "You know, Jake, I work with a lot of wealthy men, but few are so generous for no apparent reason. Maybe I just like to make people happy. Or maybe you're testing me," she asked directly, catching him off guard. "Seeing how quickly I'll spend your money, and on what?" Jacob tried not to show his surprise. Olivia was definitely sharp. "And what if I am?" he countered. Olivia smiled, revealing perfect white teeth. "Then I'd say you're more interesting than I thought, and that I appreciate a good game." She slid her hand onto his arm, her touch light but confident. "I'll have to disappoint you, though. I haven't bought anything frivolous," she continued. "I invested in myself, a fine dining experience with a potential business partner, wine that a connoisseur would appreciate, clothes that project professionalism and class, nothing reckless. They're still luxury expenses," Jacob pointed out. "Of course," she admitted without a hint of apology. "I'm an ambitious corporate lawyer. My image is part of my capital. I don't apologize for investing in myself, just as you don't apologize for your Armani suits." She had a point, and her directness was refreshing. Olivia didn't pretend she wasn't interested in money or status. On the contrary, she openly admitted it was part of what she was looking for in a potential partner. "I appreciate your honesty," Jacob said. "And I appreciate that you don't pretend money doesn't matter," she replied, moving closer. "We both know that's not true. The question is there anything more besides the money?" Her lips were now inches from his, and her perfume, expensive but subtle, enveloped him like a silk fog. "And what do you think? Is there?" he asked quietly. Olivia didn't answer with words. Instead, she kissed him, precisely, confidently, with the perfect technique of someone who knows exactly what she wants and how to get it. Jacob returned the kiss, but somewhere in the back of his mind he wondered if it was truly passion or just another calculation in her perfectly planned strategy. The following evening, Jacob found himself in Caroline's photography studio. The space was raw and industrial, exposed brick, metal beams, and huge windows overlooking the neon lights of the New York night. Caroline Adams was bustling around her newly purchased equipment, setting up lights and testing lenses. She looked different from their first meeting. Instead of a tight dress and heels, she wore loose jeans, a white t-shirt, and sneakers. Her long blonde hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her face was virtually free of makeup. "So, a model with a passion for photography?" Jacob asked, watching her expertly adjust a tripod. "More like a photographer who models to pay for her equipment," she replied, not taking her eyes off the camera. This, she pointed to the new Nikon, has been my dream for 2 years. Thanks for the card. I don't know what I did to deserve it, but it changes everything. Her gratitude seemed genuine, which surprised Jacob. Of all the candidates, Caroline had seemed the most superficial, a beautiful face with a blank expression, empty comments, laughing at everything he said, even when it wasn't funny. I didn't know you were a photographer. Because you didn't ask, she replied, giving him a sincere smile. Don't worry, I'm used to it. Most guys just see the blonde from the magazine cover. Jacob felt a pang of guilt. She was right. He had assumed he knew everything about her based on her appearance and profession. I'm sorry. That wasn't fair of me. Caroline waved her hand dismissively. Water under the bridge. Besides, if you'd known from the start that I was an aspiring artist and not just a pretty face, I might not have gotten this fantastic gear. She smiled playfully, then pointed to a stool against the wall. Sit over there. I want to test out my new portrait lens. Jacob obediently took a seat while Caroline set up the camera. So this is your real passion? Photography? Yeah, she answered, looking through the viewfinder. Modeling is a way to make money and network, but this, she lifted the camera, this is what I love. I mostly shoot people on the streets, authentic, unposed moments. Sounds fascinating, Jacob admitted, surprised that he actually meant it. A little to the left. Yes, perfect, she instructed, snapping photo after photo. I hope to have an exhibition someday, Faces of New York or something like that, to show real people, not the airbrushed ones on billboards. Jacob watched as she moved confidently around the studio, her eyes shining as she talked about her plans. She was a completely different person from the woman he'd met at the photo shoot, more authentic, full of passion and life. I have to admit, you've surprised me, he said honestly. Caroline lowered the camera and looked at him with curiosity. Why? You seemed, He hesitated, searching for a diplomatic word. Ditzy, she finished for him with an amused look. Yeah, I play that part a lot. It makes life easier in this industry. Men feel safer when they think you're just a pretty empty doll. That's sad. It's practical, she shrugged. But yeah, a little sad. She raised the camera and took a few more shots. Perfect, she said, reviewing the results on the small screen. Want to see? Jacob walked over and stood beside her, looking at the photos of himself. He was surprised by what he saw. Caroline had captured him in a way he'd never seen before, thoughtful, with a hint of melancholy in his eyes that he usually hid behind a mask of self-assured success. Wow, you're really good. Thanks, she smiled, clearly pleased with the compliment. See? Sometimes it pays to dig a little deeper. You never know what you'll find beneath the surface. Jacob thought that might be the best piece of advice he'd heard in a long time. Veronica Nash was the last on his list. They met at a rooftop bar on one of Manhattan's skyscrapers, an elegant restaurant with a panoramic view of the city. Veronica had chosen the spot, expensive, trendy, and filled with New York's business elite. Unlike the others, Veronica treated their relationship like a business transaction from the start. She was direct to the point and didn't waste time on unnecessary games. The card works perfectly, she said instead of a greeting, taking the seat across from him. I appreciate the gesture, though I still don't understand the motive behind it. Veronica had short, dark hair, sharp features, and piercing grey eyes. Dressed in a tailored suit with minimalist jewelry, she looked like a female version of Jacob, ambitious, ruthless, and focused on success. Maybe I just wanted to do something nice for you, he replied, playing with his wine glass. Veronica snorted in disbelief. We're competitors, Jacob. Your company and mine are fighting for the same contracts. You don't hand out credit cards from the goodness of your heart. She was right. Of all the candidates, Veronica was the only one who posed a business challenge to him. She was the marketing director for a company that had been trying for months to poach Sterling Tech's clients. Maybe I wanted to get to know you better, outside of a professional context. And that's why you gave me access to your account? she asked skeptically. That's an unconventional dating method. I'm an unconventional guy, Jacob shrugged. Veronica studied him for a moment, as if analyzing a complex chart. This is a test, isn't it? You're checking to see if I'll spend your money on nonsense, if I'm easily bought. Jacob almost choked on his wine. She was the second person to see through his plan. Where did you get that idea? Don't insult my intelligence, she said coolly. I did my research before our meeting. I looked into your relationship history. Amanda Hayes, Megan Wallace, Eva Brewer, all beautiful, all with a penchant for luxury handbags. All left you as soon as a better offer came along. Jacob felt his cheeks burn. He hadn't expected Veronica to be so direct or so well-informed. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. She cut him off mercilessly. But I understand your motive. You want to know if I'm only interested in your money. It's a reasonable, if primitive, approach. And what's your answer? He asked, giving up on denials. Veronica smiled for the first time that evening, though it was more of a predatory grimace than an expression of joy. I'm not interested in your money, Jacob. I'm interested in your company. Excuse me? You're smart, talented, and you have a great product. But your marketing department is terrible. Your last campaign was a disaster, and the market noticed. Your stock dropped 7%. Jacob frowned. She was right, though he didn't like that she knew it. What are you getting at? A merger, she said bluntly. My company needs your technology. Your company needs my marketing. Together, we could dominate the market. Jacob stared at her in disbelief. She had come on a date to propose a corporate merger. And you think I'll agree to this because I gave you a credit card? Veronica laughed, genuinely amused. No, Jacob. I think you'll agree because it makes business sense. The card is just proof that you're willing to take a risk to find something authentic. She leaned across the table. I'm looking for something authentic too. A partnership that makes sense, professionally and maybe personally. Her proposition was brazen, audacious, and completely unexpected, just like her. You think mixing business with pleasure is a good idea? He asked, intrigued by her offer against his better judgment. I think we're adults, and we know what we want, she replied confidently. And yes, I think it could work in both spheres. Jacob didn't know whether to admire her directness or be terrified by it. Veronica treated a romantic relationship like another contract to be negotiated, which was both unsettling and strangely refreshing after the games the other women played. And what did you do with the card? He asked, curious for her answer. I bought stock in your company, she replied with a smile. Not much, just $20,000 worth, but symbolically, I'm already a shareholder. It was a brilliant move. She had made him a business and romantic proposition simultaneously, confirming her commitment to both spheres with a concrete action. Jacob couldn't help but smile. Veronica was ruthless, but at least he knew where he stood. I'll have to think about it, he said finally. Of course, she nodded matter-of-factly. Business decisions shouldn't be made based on emotion. She reached for her purse and pulled out an elegant folder. Here are the initial proposals. Look them over when you have time. Then she stood, leaned over the table and kissed him lightly on the lips. And that's a down payment on our impersonal collaboration, she said, with a playful glint in her eye, before walking away, leaving him with the folder and a swirl of mixed feelings. Late that evening, Jacob returned to his apartment, mentally exhausted from the intense week. His uncle's experiment had yielded unexpected results. Each woman had surprised him in her own way. Dominique with her shallowness, Olivia with her calculated ambition, Caroline with her hidden passion, and Veronica with her ruthless honesty. He loosened his tie and poured himself a whiskey, reflecting on what he had learned. Was he truly interested in any of them? Could he see himself in a long-term relationship with any of these women? He picked up his phone and scrolled to the contact, candidate number 5, the cleaner. Julia still hadn't used the card. That intrigued him more than all the purchases of the other candidates combined. After a moment's hesitation, he texted, Hi, Julia. I was just checking the card statements. Yours is still untouched. Is everything okay? He waited for a few minutes, staring at the screen. Finally, a reply came. Yes, everything's fine. It's just that money isn't a toy. Sometimes, Mr. Sterling, the most valuable things are the ones that can't be bought for any price. Good night. Jacob put his phone down, feeling a strange stir within him. In a world where everything had a price tag, Julia Romero seemed to operate by a completely different set of rules. And it was she, the cleaning lady from his office, who had intrigued him more than all the sophisticated women he had met. With a smile on his face, full of genuine curiosity for the first time in days, he wondered what tomorrow would bring. Monday morning at Sterling Tower did not start well for Jacob. The elevator shuddered to a halt with a loud groan between the 15th and 16th floors, trapping him with a group of irritated employees. To make matters worse, his phone died just as he was trying to call his assistant to let her know he would be late. Fantastic, he muttered, resting his forehead against the cool metal wall of the elevator. At least you're stuck in good company, a cheerful voice said beside him. Jacob turned and saw Julia in her grey cleaning company uniform. She was holding a bucket of supplies and smiling at him faintly. Julia, what are you doing here so early? He asked, surprised to see her. On Mondays, I start at the top of the building, she explained. Executive offices first, then I work my way down. I'm usually here before you all have your first coffee. Jacob felt a pang of shame. He had never considered the logistics of cleaning a skyscraper or what time the people responsible for its upkeep started their day. Do you always start this early? 5:30, she nodded, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I like the quiet of an empty building. And the sun rises from the 30th floor. Jacob looked at her with new interest. Most people would complain about such working hours, but she spoke about them with genuine enthusiasm. It must be tough waking up so early. You get used to it, she shrugged. Besides, I have extra motivation. What's that? College, she answered with pride. My classes start at 2 in the afternoon, so it all fits together perfectly. Jacob raised his eyebrows in surprise. You're in college? What are you studying? Computer science at Kunwai, she replied, a playful glint in her eyes. Surprised? Honestly? Yes, he admitted. I didn't expect that a cleaning lady could study computer science. She finished for him, but without any resentment in her voice. Don't worry, most people assume that if I'm scrubbing floors, I don't have the brain cells for coding. Jacob felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. I know. She smiled understandingly. I'm kidding, but yeah, it's my last year. I'm specializing in cybersecurity. Before Jacob could respond, the elevator jerked and started moving up. A few seconds later, the doors opened on the 20th floor, where Sterling Tech's offices were located. This is my stop, he said, but hesitated before stepping out. Julia? Yes? You still haven't used the card, he noted, not sure why it was so important to him. Julia tilted her head, looking at him with amusement. Not everything happens instantly, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes the best things take time. The elevator doors began to close, forcing Jacob to step out quickly. The last thing he saw was her smile, before the metal doors separated them completely. Late that afternoon, Jacob was in his office reviewing financial reports when his phone buzzed. A new notification from his banking app. Card number 5, assigned to Julia Romero, had just been used. He felt a surge of adrenaline. Finally. After a week of waiting, Julia had decided to use the card. He quickly opened the app, curious to see what she had spent the money on. Next chapter initiative donation, $19,800. Jacob blinked, thinking he was seeing things. He checked again. No, it was correct. Julia had donated almost the entire limit of the card to some foundation. He immediately searched online for Next Chapter Initiative. The organization helped children from the foster care system pursue education in technology by providing scholarships, programming courses, and computer equipment. Jacob leaned back in his chair, stunned. Of all the possible expenditures, he had expected anything, from expensive shopping sprees to paying off loans, but not this. Not a donation for an educational cause. His phone buzzed again, a message from Julia. "Thank you for the opportunity to do something good. If you want to know more about the foundation I supported, we can talk. Jay." Without thinking, he called her back. "Hello?" Her voice sounded surprisingly formal. "Julia, it's Jacob. I just saw the transaction." "Ah, yes," she interrupted. "I'm sorry if I crossed any lines. You said I could spend the money on anything, so—" "No, that's not it," he assured her quickly. "I'm just surprised. Why a foundation? Why didn't you buy something for yourself?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Because I have everything I need," she finally replied, "and those kids don't. I know what it's like when you lack the tools to grow. I was in foster care myself." Jacob felt something tighten in his chest. He had not expected that answer. "I didn't know." "How could you have?" There was no bitterness in her voice, only an acceptance of the facts. "But yes, I grew up in the state system upstate. I was lucky. I had a computer science teacher who saw my potential. Thanks to her, I am where I am today. Now I'm trying to pay that debt forward." Jacob didn't know what to say. None of his candidates had surprised him as profoundly as this unassuming girl in a grey uniform. I'd like to learn more," he said finally. "About you, about the foundation, maybe over coffee." "Over coffee?" she repeated, clearly surprised. "The CEO of Sterling Tech wants to get coffee with a cleaning lady?" "No," Jacob corrected her. "Jacob wants to get coffee with Julia. It's a small detail, but it makes all the difference." There was silence on the other end, and then a quiet laugh. "All right, Jacob. Tomorrow after my shift? 1 o'clock at the Morning Brew Cafe on Bleecker Street." "Perfect," he agreed, feeling a strange sense of excitement. "See you tomorrow." When they hung up, Jacob realized he was smiling at his empty office. For some reason, the prospect of having coffee with Julia excited him more than all the lavish dinners with the other candidates. The Morning Brew Cafe was nothing like the exclusive restaurants Jacob usually frequented. It was a small place, decorated in a 70s style, with worn-out tables and faded armchairs, but it offered something those other places lacked: authenticity and warmth. Julia was already there, sitting at a table by the window. Instead of her grey uniform, she wore simple jeans, a white t-shirt and a denim jacket. With her hair down and no work cap, she looked completely different, younger and more carefree. "Hi," Jacob greeted her, taking the seat across from her. He felt strangely nervous, like he was on a first date in high school, not having coffee with an employee in his office building. "Hi," she replied with a smile. "I hope this place isn't a disappointment. I know you're used to more exclusive venues." "It's great," he assured her honestly. "I like places with character." Julia let out a short laugh. "Really? And here I thought your world was all designer restaurants and $20 cocktails." "Hey, that's not fair," he protested, but without any offense. "You don't know me." "Just like you don't know me," she countered, tilting her head. "We're even." They ordered coffee and carrot cake, supposedly the best in this part of the city. When the waitress left, Julia rested her elbows on the table and looked at him inquisitively. "So, you wanted to know more about the foundation?" "Yes, but I'd like to know more about you even more," Jacob answered honestly. Julia hesitated, fiddling with a napkin. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he said without thinking. "How did you get into computer science? Why are you working as a cleaner when you're studying at Kunwai? What do you like to do in your free time?" Julia laughed. "That's a lot of questions at once. Maybe let's start from the beginning?" She took a deep breath. "As I said, I grew up in the foster system. I ended up there when I was 7 after my mom died of cancer. I never knew my father." Jacob listened in silence, feeling a growing admiration for this young woman. "Life in the system was mixed," she continued, "but I was lucky with the people I met." Mrs. Davison, my computer science teacher, noticed I had a knack for computers. She started staying after school to teach me. In high school, I won a programming competition, which got me into CUNY. That's impressive, Jacob said sincerely. College was my goal. But you know how it is. You have to make a living, she shrugged. Working for the cleaning company is perfect. Flexible hours, decent pay, I can adjust my schedule around my classes. But with your skills, you could be working as a programmer, earning several times more. Julia looked at him seriously. I could, but then I wouldn't have time to study. A full-time IT job plus classes? I'd burn out in a month. Besides, she hesitated. Besides, Jacob prompted. Besides, I like what I do. There was pride in her voice. I know for most people, cleaning is a demeaning job. But for me, it's a way to survive, to achieve my dreams. Every polished floor brings me closer to my degree, to my future. Jacob looked at her with growing admiration. Julia had more dignity and self-assurance than most people he knew, including himself. And the foundation? He asked as the waitress brought their order. Next chapter was founded by Mrs. Davison, my teacher. Julia's face lit up. It helps kids from foster homes who have a talent for programming. The funds go towards laptops, courses, tech camps. I volunteer there, teaching the basics of coding. She took a sip of her coffee, then looked him straight in the eye. That's why I transferred the money from the card there. I know it's probably not what you expected from your experiment. She said the last word with a hint of irony. Jacob suddenly felt foolish. His credit card test now seemed shallow and superficial. No, that's definitely not what I expected, he admitted. But I'm glad you did it. It opened my eyes. To what? She asked with interest. To the fact that I was judging people through the lens of my own experiences and prejudices. I assumed that anyone given access to money would want to spend it on themselves. Julia smiled faintly. Most people probably would. And there's nothing wrong with that. If I didn't know about the foundation, maybe I would have bought myself a new laptop or paid my rent for a few months in advance. But you didn't. No, she agreed. Because I know that money can change someone's life. Just like someone once changed mine. They sat in silence for a moment, eating the cake, which was indeed delicious. Jacob couldn't stop thinking about how different Julia was from the other women. It wasn't even about what she spent the money on, but about her approach to life, conscious, full of gratitude, and devoid of entitlement. And you? Julia asked suddenly, breaking his train of thought. Why is a millionaire handing out credit cards to random women? And don't tell me it was just a social experiment. Jacob sighed, knowing she deserved the truth. It was my uncle's idea. After my last breakup, he decided I attract women who are only interested in my money. He suggested I give credit cards to potential partners and see how they use them. And how did it go? She asked with curiosity. Well, Jacob rubbed the back of his neck. The results were varied. Tell me, she encouraged him, leaning over the table. Jacob hesitated, but something in her genuine interest made him want to open up. He told her about Dominique and her social media obsession, about Olivia and her cold calculations, about Caroline, who surprised him with her passion for photography, and about Veronica with her business proposition. Julia listened attentively, occasionally nodding or asking a question. She didn't judge, she didn't criticize, she just listened. So what now? She asked when he finished. Have you chosen your ideal partner from this group? Jacob looked her straight in the eye. Honestly, none of them seem right. Not even Caroline, who turned out to be more complex than I thought. They're all part of a world I've been living in for years. A world that's starting to exhaust me. What kind of world? Julia asked quietly. A world of appearances, where everything is for show, where all that matters is money, status, and how others perceive you. Jacob sighed deeply. You know what the worst part is? I created this world around myself. I walled myself off from normalcy with an exclusive apartment, expensive suits and restaurants, where a glass of wine costs as much as rent for a small apartment. And now you regret it. Now, he hesitated, now I see that it's all empty, that you can live differently, like you. Julia chuckled quietly. Trust me, living on a scholarship and a cleaner's salary isn't something you should be envious of. I don't envy your financial situation, Jacob clarified. I envy your authenticity, your sense of purpose, the fact that you know who you are and where you're going. Julia fell silent, looking at him with a mixture of surprise and something he couldn't decipher. For a moment, they just sat there, looking at each other. Jacob felt something shifting between them, as if an invisible barrier of status and position was beginning to crack. So, Julia finally began, what's next for your experiment? I think it's time to end it, Jacob replied. 5 cards, 5 different stories, and one that taught me more than the other 4 combined. Julia looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Don't overestimate me, Jacob. I'm not some moral compass. I just did what I thought was right. And that's exactly what's so impressive, he said, reaching across the table and lightly touching her hand. In a world where everyone is trying to take advantage of a situation, you thought of others. Julia didn't pull her hand away, but she looked at him seriously. You realize we come from completely different worlds, right? That I clean your office and you're my boss's client? Technically, you're employed by the cleaning company, not me, he corrected her with a smile, but I understand what you mean, and yes, I realize that. The question is, does it matter? Julia bit her lower lip, clearly considering his words. Not to me, she said finally, but to others, to your world, to your friends, family, business partners, the CEO of a tech company and a college student who cleans for a living. Jacob knew she was right. In his circles, such a relationship would be a scandal, a source of gossip and ridicule. But for the first time in a very long time, he didn't care what other people thought. What if we started over, he proposed. No labels, no social roles, just Jacob and Julia, 2 people who want to get to know each other better. Julia looked at him for a long time, various emotions warring in her eyes. Finally she smiled, a genuine, open smile without a hint of calculation. We could try, she agreed, but on one condition. What's that? You take the credit card back. I don't want anything to interfere with whatever this is between us. Jacob felt his heart speed up. He hadn't expected such a proposal, or how much he wanted to agree to it. It's a deal, he said, squeezing her hand. From now on, I'm just Jacob, not the CEO, not the millionaire. And I'm just Julia, she replied, returning the squeeze. Not the cleaner, not the scholarship kid from foster care. They looked at each other for a long moment, and something new was born between them, something unexpected and yet exciting. Something neither of them had anticipated, but which now seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Jacob knew it wouldn't be easy. That many challenges and obstacles awaited them. But looking into her green eyes, he felt that for the first time in a very long time, he was heading in the right direction. His phone vibrated in his pocket, another notification from the banking app. Ignoring it, Jacob leaned across the table. Tell me more about yourself, Julia, he asked. About everything. I want to know everything. And so over coffee and carrot cake in the unassuming Morning Brew Cafe on Bleecker Street, their story began. A story that neither of them had foreseen in their wildest dreams. 2 weeks after their first coffee, Jacob and Julia were seeing each other regularly. They were slowly getting to know each other's worlds. He showed her his favorite contemporary art gallery, and she took him to a student jam session in the basement of an old dormitory. Their relationship was developing organically, without pressure or expectations. That evening, Jacob waited nervously in his apartment. It was the first time Julia was coming over. He had changed his clothes 3 times, wavering between casual and elegant, finally settling on a simple shirt and jeans. It's just dinner, he muttered to his reflection in the mirror. The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Julia stood in the doorway, dressed in a simple dress with a small backpack slung over her shoulder. "Hi," she said, looking around the spacious foyer. "So this is where the millionaire lives?" "Stop it," he laughed, kissing her lightly on the cheek. "You promised not to mention the differences." "It's hard not to when your living room is bigger than my entire apartment," she replied, but there was no bitterness in her voice, only amusement. Jacob showed her around the apartment, feeling strangely embarrassed by its opulence. The panoramic windows with city views, the designer furniture, the abstract paintings on the walls. It all suddenly seemed pretentious. "Too ostentatious?" he asked, seeing her expression as she looked at the marble bathroom. "I'd say sterile," she answered diplomatically, as if someone who doesn't quite know who they are lives here. Her words hit so close to home that Jacob didn't know what to say. In the kitchen, he prepared dinner, by himself, without the help of the catering he usually ordered. Pasta with tomato sauce, the simplest dish he knew how to make. "I didn't know you could cook," Julia noted, sitting at the kitchen island. "I usually don't," he admitted, "but I figured it was time to start." They ate, talking about her studies and his company, about books and movies, about their childhoods, his privileged, hers difficult, but full of determination. With every minute, the distance between their worlds seemed to shrink. After dinner, Julia took a laptop out of her backpack. "Can I show you something?" "Of course." She opened a program she'd been working on, an application to help children in the foster care system connect with potential mentors in the tech industry. "This is my thesis project," she explained, showing him the interface. "I want to connect kids from difficult backgrounds with people who can help them find their way." Jacob listened, watching her eyes sparkle with passion. Suddenly, his own work, creating software for corporations so they could make more money, seemed empty. "This is amazing," he said sincerely. "But you'll need support, a network of contacts, maybe funding." "That's why I'm showing you," she interrupted. "Not as a millionaire who can give money, but as Jacob who understands the industry and can offer advice." Jacob felt a warmth spread through his chest. Julia didn't see him as a wallet, a position, or a status symbol. She saw a person with skills that could help with something important. Later, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the New York night, Julia rested her head on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it meant more than all the sophisticated compliments he had ever received from other women. "You know this isn't going to be easy, right?" she asked quietly. "You and me. Our worlds." Jacob put his arm around her. "Some worlds are worth colliding," he replied, kissing the top of her head gently. That night, as he drove her back to her small apartment in Queens, he knew his uncle's experiment had produced a result that neither of them had expected. The credit card was supposed to help him find a woman who didn't care about his money. Instead, he found one who taught him that some things were more important than wealth. Absolutely not. Al Walczak slammed his fist on the table, making the wine glasses jump. "Have you lost your mind? A cleaning lady? This was supposed to be a test, not whatever this is." They were in a private room at Verve, where it had all begun. Jacob had invited his uncle to dinner to inform him of the experiment's results. Al's reaction was exactly what he had expected. "She's not a cleaning lady anymore, at least not for me," Jacob replied calmly. "She's a computer science student who's about to graduate. And yes, we're seeing each other." Al shook his head in disbelief. "Kid, I raised you after your father died, and for what? So you could get involved with the first clever girl who pretends to be a saint?" Jacob felt his blood begin to boil. "Pretends?" "She donated almost the entire amount from the card to a charity." "Of course she did," Al snorted. "It's the smartest strategy. The others spent the money on themselves, but she invested in your naivete. Now she has all of you, not just $25,000. "Uncle, not everything revolves around money and calculations," Jacob sighed. "In this world, everything revolves around money." Al leaned across the table. "Do you think your company would be successful if you were guided by sentiment instead of hard data? Wake up, Jake. This girl is playing the long game." Jacob shook his head. He might have believed his uncle once, but now, after weeks spent with Julia, he knew better. "Uncle, I appreciate your concern, but you're wrong this time. Julia is different. They're all different. Until they get what they want," Al muttered, taking a sip of wine. "Besides, what do your friends think? The board? Your business partners? What will they say when you introduce them to your chosen one?" This was a painful point that Jacob had been trying to avoid. For the past few weeks, he and Julia had been living in their own little bubble, meeting in neutral places or at her modest apartment. He hadn't yet introduced her to his world of business and wealth. "I don't care what they say," he lied. Al laughed. "Sure. And what about her? Is she comfortable in your world? The world of money, luxury, business dinners and charity galas?" Jacob didn't answer, which Al took as a victory. "Listen." His uncle's tone softened slightly. "I'm not saying you have to break up with her. Have your fun if you want, but don't make it serious. It's two different worlds, Jake. Fire and water. Sooner or later one will extinguish the other." Jacob remained silent, turning his wineglass in his hands. The most unsettling part was that there was a shadow of truth in his uncle's words. He and Julia came from completely different worlds. The question was whether those worlds could merge or only collide. "This is ridiculous," Julia said, nervously shifting clothes in her small closet. "I have absolutely nothing appropriate for a charity gala." Jacob sat on her bed, watching her rummage through her wardrobe. Her apartment was tiny, one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom the size of a closet, but it was cozy and filled with books that occupied every free space. "We can go shopping," he suggested. "I know a few great boutiques." "No," she interrupted him firmly. "You're not buying me a dress for this. If I'm going to enter your world, I'll do it on my own terms." Jacob smiled. He loved her independence, even if it sometimes complicated things. "In that case, what do you suggest?" Julia sighed, sitting down next to him. "Maybe I can borrow something from Kate. My roommate from last year has good taste, and we're a similar size." Jacob put his arm around her. "You know we don't have to go. It's just another boring gala, people spending thousands on tickets to show off how generous they are." Julia looked at him carefully. "But it's important for your company, right? And probably for the foundation you support?" She was right. The annual IT Future Foundation Gala was the most important event in the industry, combining business with charity. Sterling Tech was always a major sponsor. "Yes, but—" "No buts," Julia cut him off. "If we're going to be together, I need to get to know your world, just like you got to know mine." Jacob remembered their last outing, a party at a student club where he felt completely out of place in his designer shoes and expensive watch. Julia had a great time, introducing him to her college friends as Jake, without mentioning his company or status. Her friends were loud, friendly, and completely unaware of who he really was. "That was different," he protested weakly. "No one there was judging you based on how much your handbag cost. And you think no one there was judging you for your $2,000 shoes?" She replied with a smile. "Every world has its own rules, Jake. I learned that a long time ago." Jacob kissed her lightly. "You're smarter than me." "Of course I am," she agreed with a laugh. "Now help me figure out what to wear to your snobby gala." A few hours and a visit to the aforementioned Kate later, Julia had a simple black dress that looked surprisingly elegant. It wasn't designer, it didn't cost a fortune, but it highlighted her slim figure and suited her natural beauty. "Do I look appropriate?" she asked, twirling in front of him. Jacob looked at her with admiration. With her hair up in a simple bun, delicate makeup, and minimal jewelry, Julia looked elegant and classy. Not like a celebrity or a rich man's daughter, but like a confident young woman who knew her own worth. "You look beautiful," he answered honestly. "But are you sure you want to do this? Some of these people can be difficult." Julia took a deep breath. "I am. I want to see what I'll have to face if—" she hesitated, "if our relationship has a future." Jacob felt his heart speed up. They hadn't talked about the future yet, about where they were headed. He only knew that with each passing day, it became harder to imagine his life without her. "It will be fine," he assured her, though he wasn't so sure himself. "I'm with you." Julia smiled, but in her eyes, a shadow of uncertainty mirrored his own fears. The hotel ballroom glittered with lights and elegant attire. A red carpet led to the grand hall, where the gala was being held. Jacob and Julia got out of the cab, pausing for a moment before the entrance. "Ready?" he asked, squeezing her hand. "As I'll ever be," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. They walked inside, immediately enveloped by the buzz of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the discreet music of an orchestra. The room was filled with the elite of the New York tech scene, CEOs, investors, and industry-adjacent celebrities. "Jacob," a voice called from the side, "you finally made it." Marcin Kowalski, Sterling Tech's CFO, was heading toward them with a glass of champagne in his hand. Following him was his wife Alexandra, dressed in a gown that likely cost more than Julia's annual rent. "Marcin, Alex," Jacob greeted them. "This is Julia Romero." Marcin shook Julia's hand with a professional smile, but something flashed in Alexandra's eyes that could only be read as appraisal, a quick scan of the dress, the shoes, the lack of designer jewelry. "Julia Romero?" Alexandra repeated. "I don't recall us meeting. What company are you with, dear?" Julia straightened up slightly. "I'm a computer science student at CUNY. My specialization is cybersecurity." "Oh," Alexandra raised her eyebrows. "How interesting. And how did you meet our dear Jacob?" Jacob sensed the tension and was about to intervene, but Julia beat him to it. "We met in his office building," she answered with a smile, "by the elevator." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Jacob felt a simultaneous sense of relief and a pang of guilt. Was he ashamed of how he had really met Julia? Was he afraid of his friend's reaction to the news that he was dating the woman who used to clean his office? "How romantic," Alexandra commented with a forced smile. "Jake always did have an eye for unexpected choices." Marcin cleared his throat, sensing the growing tension. "Jacob, we need to talk about the presentation before the auction. Will you join us at the bar?" Jacob hesitated, looking at Julia. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "I'll be fine." He reluctantly left her, following Marcin. When they reached the bar, his colleague looked at him seriously. "Jake, no offense, but what are you doing, bringing a student to the biggest event of the year?" "She's my partner," Jacob replied stiffly. "Your partner?" Marcin shook his head. "Listen, have your fun, but girls like that don't belong in this world. Think about the company's reputation." Jacob felt anger rising in his chest. "What kind of girls, Marcin?" "You know," Marcin made a vague gesture with his hand. "From a different sphere. The board is already whispering. Caroline Adams, Veronica Nash, those were suitable candidates. But an unknown student." "Julia is not unknown," Jacob said coolly, "and she's worth 10 times more than half the people in this room." Marcin held up his hands in a defensive gesture. "Hey, it's your life, but you're the face of the company. People are watching, judging, talking." Jacob looked over at Julia, who was now standing alone by a column observing the room. She looked lost, despite her efforts to appear otherwise. "You know what, Marcin? I don't think I care what people are talking about." He left his stunned colleague and started back toward Julia. Before he reached her, he noticed someone had approached her. With a jolt, he recognized Dominique Vance, the influencer, one of the candidates from his experiment. "Julia!" he called out, quickening his pace. Dominique turned with a wide, professional smile. "Jake, darling, I didn't know you'd be here tonight." "That's strange, considering we're the main sponsor," he replied dryly. "I see you've met Julia." "Oh yes, we were just chatting." Dominique sent Julia a look that said more than 1,000 words. "A very charming girl. I was just wondering where she got that dress. It looks so authentic." Julia lifted her chin slightly. "At a thrift store in Queens. I'd recommend it. You can find some real gems if you aren't addicted to labels." Dominique blinked, surprised by the direct response. "How eco-friendly of you." "Dominique," Jacob interjected, "excuse us, but we need to greet some other guests." Of course," Dominique waved her hand. "Besides, I need to take some pictures for Instagram. This gala is a great opportunity to boost my engagement." As she walked away, Julia looked at Jacob with a mixture of amusement and resignation. "So that's one of your candidates?" "Unfortunately," he confirmed. "I'm sorry about that." "Don't be sorry," Julia shrugged. "It's not your fault your world is full of colorful personalities." Jacob looked around the room. From every corner he felt eyes on them. Curious, judging, sometimes hostile. People were whispering, glancing, analyzing. Julia must have felt it just as strongly as he did. "Do you want to get out of here?" he asked impulsively. "We could go somewhere where it's just us." Julia looked at him in surprise. "But this is an important event for your company. Your presentation, the auction." "It's just work," he said, realizing he truly meant it. "And you're more important." Julia was silent for a moment, her eyes shining with emotion. "I appreciate that, Jake, I really do. But we can't run away. Not tonight." "Why not?" "Because then they win," she answered simply. "All these people who are judging us, who think I don't belong in your world, let's show them they're wrong." Jacob looked at her with admiration. Julia, who grew up in foster care, who cleaned offices to pay for college, had more dignity and courage than anyone in that room. "You're right," he agreed. "Let's show them." He took her hand and led her toward the center of the room, where the most important guests were gathered. With every step he felt Julia straighten her back, her uncertainty giving way to determination. It would be a long evening, full of hidden barbs, false smiles, and unspoken judgments, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. As they stood in the middle of the crowd, Jacob thought that his uncle's experiment had yielded a result neither of them had expected. Instead of finding a woman who fit into his world, he had found someone who made him question that world. And maybe that was exactly what he needed. 4 months after the memorable charity gala, Jacob stood nervously outside a small conference room at the university. In his hand, he clutched a bouquet of wildflowers, Julia's favorite. "Can you stop pacing like a caged tiger?" laughed Marcin, who, to everyone's surprise, had become their staunchest ally after seeing how Julia handled herself at the gala. "She's just defending her master's thesis, not facing a firing squad." I know, Jacob sighed. "It's just a big day for her." "And you're nervous about meeting her professors," Marcin added with understanding. "Weird feeling, huh? Usually you're the one people are nervous about." Jacob had to admit he was right. Over the past few months, his life had changed beyond recognition. He was still the successful CEO of Sterling Tech, but he was also spending more and more time in Julia's world, on campus, in cheap student bars, at her modest apartment that had become a second home to him. The doors to the room opened, and a group of students emerged. Julia was among them, radiant with a wide smile and a diploma in her hand. "I passed with distinction," she cried, throwing her arms around Jacob's neck. He held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I never doubted it for a second," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you." An older woman with grey hair and a warm smile also came out of the room. "Professor Nowak," Julia turned. "This is Jacob, my—" She hesitated for a moment. "Partner." "A pleasure to meet the famous Jacob," the professor said, shaking his hand. "Julia has told me a lot about you." "I hope it was all good," he replied with a smile. "Mostly about your involvement in her project." The professor nodded in approval. "The mentorship platform is the best project I've seen in years. It has enormous social potential." Jacob looked at Julia with affection. Over the past few months, he had been helping her develop the application connecting kids from foster care with mentors in the tech industry. He had used his business contacts, but Julia was the heart and mind of the project. "It's all her," he said honestly. "I just helped a bit on the technical side." "And financially," Julia added, squeezing his hand. "Without Sterling Tech's investment, we wouldn't have the servers or the development team." It was true. 2 months prior, Jacob had presented the project to his company's board as a social initiative, and to his surprise, the idea was met with enthusiasm, especially after they learned that the creator was that student who handled herself so elegantly at the gala, despite all those stuck-up snobs. "Ms. Romero has a bright future ahead of her," the professor said. "She's already received 3 job offers, including one from a leading cybersecurity firm." Jacob looked at Julia, surprised. She hadn't mentioned any offers to him. "Really? That's wonderful. I wanted to tell you tonight," Julia explained quickly. "It's been a crazy week preparing for the defense." The professor said her goodbyes, leaving them alone in the hallway. Martin discreetly stepped away, giving them space. "So, job offers?" Jacob asked, trying to hide his anxiety. He didn't want to pressure her, but at the same time he feared these new opportunities might mean she would leave. "Yes." Julia took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about it, but not here. Let's have dinner at our place, okay?" Our Place, a small, cozy restaurant in the West Village, where they had first officially called themselves a couple. Jacob nodded, trying to ignore his growing unease. A few hours later, they were sitting at their favorite corner table. Julia was nervously playing with her wine glass. "So," Jacob began, "these job offers." "Yes," Julia took a deep breath. "They're very good. Especially the one from Secure Tech. They're offering me a position as a cybersecurity specialist with opportunities for advancement. The salary, well, it's not what you make, but for me, it's a fortune." Jacob felt his heart beat faster. "Is it in New York?" "No," she said quietly. "It's in Austin." The silence that fell between them was heavy with unspoken emotions. "Austin," he repeated finally. "That's far." "A 3-hour flight?" Julia nodded. Jacob looked her straight in the eye. "Are you going to take it?" Julia met his gaze with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I want to. It's a great opportunity, Jake. A global company working with the best specialists. I could really spread my wings." Jacob felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Over the past few months, Julia had become the center of his world. She had taught him to see life from a new perspective, to appreciate things he hadn't noticed before. The thought of being without her was unbearable. "I understand," he said quietly, though he didn't at all. Julia reached out and placed her hand on his. "But there's something else, something I've been thinking about for weeks." "Yes?" "Our project, the mentorship platform. It's more important to me than any corporate career." Jacob frowned. "What do you mean?" "I think it could become something more than just a social initiative of Sterling Tech," she replied, a sparkle in her eye. "It could be an independent startup with its own team, mission and vision." "A startup, you mean?" "A new company," she finished. "Our company, if you'd be willing to join me. We could use your business knowledge and my technical skills to build something that really helps people." Jacob stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to leave Sterling Tech?" "Not right away," she said quickly. "We could start slowly, part-time. But yes, eventually I'd want us both to be fully dedicated to it." Jacob leaned back in his chair, stunned. Leaving the company he had built from the ground up seemed like a crazy idea. At the same time, the prospect of creating something new, something with real social impact, was incredibly appealing. "And what about Austin?" he asked, returning to the original topic. Julia smiled gently. "I already turned them down. I'm staying in New York, if I have someone to stay for." Jacob felt a wave of relief wash over him, immediately replaced by a new emotion, admiration for this extraordinary woman who had just turned down a great job offer for a long shot, for a dream, for him. "Julia, you can't give up an opportunity like that for us," she interrupted, "and for something I truly believe in. I've seen how our app works, Jake. I've seen the faces of those kids when we connect them with mentors. This is what I want to do." Jacob looked at her with growing admiration. Julia always surprised him, with her determination, her courage, and her clarity of purpose. "What if we fail?" he asked quietly. What if the startup goes under? Julia shrugged. Then we'll figure something else out. Together. Jacob was silent for a long moment, mentally weighing all the pros and cons. Leaving the company he had built was terrifying, but the prospect of working with Julia every day, creating something truly meaningful. "My uncle is going to have a heart attack," he said finally with a smile. Julia laughed. "He already thinks I'm a gold digger who's going to ruin your life." "Well, technically you are proposing that I abandon a profitable company for a risky startup, so—" Jacob raised an eyebrow in a joking gesture. "See? He was right." Julia clasped her hands dramatically. "My cunning plan is revealed." They both burst out laughing, breaking the tension. When the laughter subsided, Jacob squeezed her hand. "Let's do it," he said seriously. "Let's build something together, something that's ours." Julia looked at him in disbelief. "Really? You're willing to leave Sterling Tech?" "Not right away," he clarified. "Like you said, we'll start slow. But yes, I'm ready for a change. I've felt for a long time that I needed something more, something with real meaning." Julia's eyes filled with happy tears. "I didn't think you'd agree. I thought I'd have to convince you for a long time. Well, a certain wise woman taught me that some things are more important than money and status." Jacob smiled. "Besides, I've always wanted a boss who's also my girlfriend." "Hey, who said I'd be the boss?" she protested with a laugh. "And you wouldn't be?" He raised an eyebrow. "It's your idea, your project. I'll just be a humble co-founder." "Equal partners," Julia corrected him, "in business and in life." Jacob felt his heart race. In life, those three words held the promise of a future he desired more and more. "In that case," he reached into his jacket pocket, "maybe we should seal this deal." He took out a small velvet box and placed it on the table between them. Julia held her breath. "Jake, I wasn't planning on doing this today," he explained quickly. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. But I don't think there's a better moment than when we're deciding to change our lives together." Julia stared at the box, not touching it. "Are you sure? This is a big step." "The biggest of my life," he admitted. "And the first one I have absolutely no doubts about." Slowly, Julia opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single diamond. Beautiful, but not ostentatious. "It's not as extravagant as the ones you've probably seen in luxury boutiques," Jacob began. "It's perfect," Julia interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's just perfect." "Julia Romero," Jacob took a deep breath, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my partner in business, in life, and in everything the future holds?" Julia looked him straight in the eye, her face breaking into the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. "Yes," she answered without a hint of hesitation. "Yes, yes, and 1,000 times yes." As Jacob slid the ring onto her finger, he felt his life fall into a new, more perfect pattern. His uncle's experiment had produced a result no one could have expected. Instead of finding a woman who fit his world of wealth and status, he found someone who showed him a whole new world, a world where money was a tool for doing good, not a measure of worth. "You know," he said as they walked through the West Village later, holding hands, "I should probably thank Uncle Al for those credit cards." Julia laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think he'll believe I'm not after your money when he finds out I convinced you to leave your profitable company?" "Probably not," Jacob admitted, "but you know what? I don't care at all." They stopped on a small bridge, looking at the water reflecting the city lights. Julia stood on her toes and kissed him lightly. "So what now, Mr. Sterling?" she asked with a playful glint in her eye. "Now, future Mrs. Sterling," he replied, wrapping his arms around her. "We start over, together." And as they stood there, holding each other against the backdrop of the illuminated city, Jacob knew he had found something that no amount of money could buy, true love, based not on what you have, but on who you truly are.